I'm Emily Long. I want to welcome all of you to tonight's webinar regarding the recent conversations about Vermont's education, Vermont System of Education Governance. I'm the interim president of the Vermont School Boards Association. I've served on local boards for more than 20 years. I'm currently chair of the Leland and Gray Union High School Board and the Windham Central Supervisory Union Board. Those of you who know me know I'm passionately supportive of public education. I believe strongly in the critical role of school boards and the importance of local communities. I also believe that we, as school boards, first and foremost, must be concerned about students and about taxpayers. Their interests need to guide our conversations. And in fact, we're delighted that you've all joined us this evening to be part of this discussion. We'll move on to the next slide.
Yeah, hopefully that works. Okay.
Yeah, very good. So presenting this evening with me tonight will be Steve Dale, who's Executive Director of the VSBA. I'm sure most, if not all of you, know who he is. Also joining us is, as you've heard, our tech expert, thank you, Carrie, VSBA Operations Manager, Carrie Lamb. So this is how the webinar is going to work tonight. I've got to tell you, operating a webinar of this type is a challenge. I'm joining you from Newfane with very weak internet, so I'm hoping this stays strong. Steve and Carrie are in Montpelier. All of you are in 45 different locations around Vermont. Some of you are viewing this conversation as part of a board meeting and will follow this session with your own discussions. The key things for you to know are as follows. We will do a presentation by PowerPoint and verbally. We will then have a question period where you can ask questions via a question box or by voice. If you choose to participate by voice during this time, just raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon on the corner of your screen, and Carrie will invite you to ask your question. We have a large number of people joining us tonight, so we will ask that you make your questions brief, a minute or less. There will be an evaluation at the end, which we hope you will fill out. And we will also email this PowerPoint to each of you with a summary of this webinar. So the purpose of this webinar tonight is to share information with all our members and to gather information from all of you. We are going to share the broad perspective, present some data, review the VSBA discussions up to this point, summarize H883, the bill, and finally get your perspective to help guide our next steps. So the agenda, as you see on your screen. We're going to be spending the first half hour sharing the context of the conversation so far, and then some data slides from our situational analysis, which some of you may have seen. Then we're going to move on now. I think, Steve, to you.
Okay.
Am I right?
Thanks, Emily, and thanks to all of you who have joined us. This is one of our larger webinars. We do these several times a year, and it's clear that this is an issue of considerable interest to many, many people. So the beginning of this session is really designed to both describe the environment that we find ourselves in and then move on to the specifics of the current subject. This is not a new issue. Some of you have been around Vermont a long time. You know this is not new. There's been sustained conversation over a long period of time, beginning about 50 years ago. It has been particularly intense over the past decade with two major studies that called for restructuring and the passage, as well as the passage of a voluntary consolidation bill, which is known by most as Act 153 and Act 156. One of the two documents that was done in the last decade was done by Commissioner Richard Cate back in the mid-2000s. The other was done by a commission put together by the State Board of Education, and it's entitled Opportunity to Learn. And I believe that document can be accessed through the Agency of Education website, and it's worth a read. It describes the major changes that have been in the making in the education world over the past few years around personalization, the change in the education quality standards and so on, but it also included some proposals about education structure. Over the past several years, proposals have been brought forward repeatedly by various members of the legislature calling for creation of varied numbers of school districts, from 10 to 13 to 16 to 20 to 30. And many of you have heard those discussions over time. They haven't always been grounded in seeking particular outcomes. It hasn't been clear what the thinking is behind those numbers, and that's been of significant concern to all of us. At the same time, there's been a significant focus on moving education forward to respond to the changing world that we are all a part of. And last year, the VSBA, together with the Superintendents Association, released a joint agenda for a world-class education. That was very consistent with the thinking of the governor and the new state agency of education, and the legislature passed Act 77, which calls for personalized education, with the goal being to engage every child. That for years in public education, I think we've seen ourselves as running a good, solid program that we hoped most kids could connect with. But I think we've moved to a place where we've said it is not acceptable for us to be missing any students, that we in fact need to be much more focused on personalization. There's also been significant concern about the lack of equal opportunity in Vermont from area to area. And finally, the last bullet here, the ongoing concerns about rising per student costs have created a significant amount of political energy from the financial side. And although most people will tell you that finances are not the primary driver, and we certainly hope they aren't, the fact is that the financial realities create a backdrop for this discussion that we'll be talking a little bit more about. About a year, well, it wasn't quite a year ago, it was last May, the School Boards Association and the Superintendents Association created this document, which I'm about to run through with you in an abbreviated version. There is a 20-minute video on our website. Some of you, I'm sure, have seen it. It's called the Situational Analysis of Public Education in Vermont, and it was designed to put forward a number of facts and concepts that help people understand what are all the moving parts and what are the concerns out there when people begin to talk about the need for some kinds of changes in our education system. I'm going to go through this very rapidly, and again, if you want to delve into it some more, it's a good use of 20 minutes to get the full view. But I think it's important to do this just to set the stage for the discussion about the bill that we're about to have. When you look at the data, one of the first things that people talk about is the fact that our student population has been dropping rapidly over the last 15 years. I should say rapidly, but it's been about 1% a year. But in that 15-year period, since my youngest son graduated from high school in 1999, we've gone from about 105,000 students down to somewhere at 85,000. That is the significant backdrop for this discussion. Our world has changed dramatically, and there are people who say, well, this is the problem. We ought to be trying to attract people into Vermont. We ought to be focused on economic drivers. We shouldn't be just dealing with this issue. Obviously, that is true, and this is part of the reality. Second major piece of the reality is that the number of adults in our schools is approximately the same today as it was 10 years ago. And you can see the number of teachers as the top line and the number of paraeducators in the bottom line. There was a little rise and a little fall, but by and large we have the same number of people serving 18% or so fewer children now than we did back much earlier in the century. Part of the backdrop is Vermont's ability to fund education. As you can see, In terms of comparing us with other New England states and with the country, our median household income is somewhat less than most of New England, slightly higher than that in the country. The PICUS report of a couple of years ago identified that Vermont's tax effort, which is both our overall expenses and our tax rate connected with our median income, is the highest in the United States. These are some tax rates from the past few years. The 101 is what was originally projected for 2015. The House Ways and Means Committee looks like it's moving toward a 98-cent rate for next year. Any way you slice it, our tax rates do continue to push us toward the highest tax effort. That comes from a variety of factors. I'm going to touch on a couple. One is that the source of funds has changed fairly significantly over the past few years. In 2005, 61% of the education fund came from property taxes. In 2015, the coming year, it will be 68% that comes from property taxes. So one of the drivers has been state policy around where the money comes from. A second pressure comes from the number of added responsibilities for public schools that have been added over the years. We've got a full list from the past decade or so. It's lengthy. Most of the things are good things. However, most of them have some kind of price tag associated with them, and it's one of the reasons why it's been difficult for school district budgets to remain, to follow the trend line of falling student population directly. This is probably the most compelling slide to legislators and others looking from a statewide perspective. As you know, our statewide funding system, our funding system is a statewide system such that all of the budgets that you all get approved, and by the way, boards did an incredible job this year with keeping their expenditure levels down to somewhere around the 3% area on average. But the big issue is the cost per student. And if you look over the last decade, actually this is the decade 2002 to 2012, and the red bar being 2002, the yellow bar 2012, you can see that in 2002 our cost per student, the amount we spent per student, was somewhere slightly on the upside of New England, but pretty much in the middle of the pack. Over the past decade or more, our cost per student has risen more rapidly than anyone in the country, and we now spend more per student than almost anyone else. I believe New Jersey may be slightly above us and New York slightly below us, but the fact is we're up there. And so when people talk about is all of this sustainable, everybody has their own opinion about that, but the thing that people are most concerned about is the degree of the rise over the last 10 or 15 years, almost more than the actual number itself. I don't hear too many people saying, let's reduce our spending, let's save tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, although there are some who say that. But most people say we need to slow the rise in per pupil spending. And most of you know that, certainly you all would know that most of the costs associated with schools come from salaries, from the personnel that work in our schools. I think most people know that our per pupil, our student-teacher ratios are among the lowest in the in fact, is the lowest in the United States, 11.6. And our staff-to-student ratio is our students-to-staff ratio rather is 5.2, which again is the lowest in the country. And that, of course, is what fundamentally drives our cost per student. Our average teacher salaries are not the primary driver for that variable. As you can see, in New England, our rate of teacher pay is slightly lower than, is lower than most of New England and lower than the national average. Shifting now from the money to a couple of quick slides related to students and their achievement. You all are very aware of the achievement gap which persists. This is the grade 3 to 8 data. Students with the reading scores for students who receive free and reduced lunch versus those who do not, and you can see the math scores as well with that same kind of a gap. And in 11th grade, there we go, the gap is similar. I don't know. Okay. Vermont has the best four-year graduation rate in the country, which is something we can and should be very proud of. We also know that there is also an achievement gap there as well in terms of students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And historically, one of our college enrollment rates are among the lowest in the nation, and part of that is driven by our high graduation rate. So that the more students who graduate, then you're counting all of those students in terms of who goes on to higher education and who completes higher education. Regardless of how you count it, this has been a fairly unremarkable statistic for us as a state. Again, there are lots of data that we could be looking at. So the last slide in this particular sequence is just to remind us that the conversation about governance sits in the midst of a lot of other activity, which is the heart and soul of why we are all connected to this business. There have been various kinds of discussions about governance. Where there was a lot of expansion of opportunities for students through dual enrollment, through the expansion of pre-kindergarten, the new standards for teaching and learning, personalized learning plans, all the discussion about Common Core and so on and so forth. All of those things are going on. Those are all areas that really require a lot of the time and attention of our administrators and our teachers. So I want to move now away from that background information. Again, that's the short version. It became clear by mid-December that there would be a press during this session to move forward with some kind of agenda regarding the governance and leadership of education. And our board discussed this at quite some length and came to the conclusion that we ought to be involved in this discussion. Boards should be and are more invested in this issue than anyone else. We said that we needed to be willing to look at the global situation honestly, that our passion needs to be about what is best for students and for taxpayers with a strong emphasis on community values. And we ended up discussing four major variables that I wanted to go through with you, or four major considerations, all of which have a direct connection to students. And the first had to do with the need to expand student opportunity. We have committed ourselves to supporting this whole notion of personalized education. That requires more opportunities, not less, more flexibility, not less. And in a time of limited resources, it is very difficult for many of our boards to find ways to keep their budgets within the limits that are being expected and provide, or certainly to preserve the opportunities we have and to perhaps provide more. There are a number of our middle schools where we have very limited arts, very limited opportunities in the area of foreign languages, and so on. And those specific areas are ones that we need to be concerned about. So the most important thing is this particular area, and every board in the state has a different experience. You all, there's a lot of people on this call tonight, and you all have a different reality that you're looking at. But I can assure you that this is an issue of varying degrees around the state, and it's very real in many of our communities. The second is the whole issue of stabilizing costs and tax rates. It is difficult to create stable, sustainable budgets over the long run in the current configuration. There's pressure. The pressure continues to rise around the increase in cost per student. And if you're in a small district and you lose 2 families that happen to have 8 children, it can change your tax rate overnight dramatically. And again, most of you know this and have experienced this. The town of Walden, their budget was defeated 6 times last fall. They finally got a budget in December. A lot of these kinds of factors were present. Ultimately, this situation will impact quality if it hasn't already, and we know some places where it has. And there's currently great volatility for taxpayers, again, with small fluctuations in student count that can create significant problems in some communities. The third issue that we discussed was attracting and retaining top-notch leaders. There are 16 or 18 superintendent turnovers that may be more before we're done because of the ripple effect. We as an association are involved in 6 of the hiring processes right at the moment, and there is a very shallow pool of folks who are interested in accepting leadership positions. There's also a significant turnover of principals. If we are to make the kinds of changes we need to continue to move education forward, we need to be concerned about that. We need to be creating circumstances that will allow us to attract and retain very high-level leadership. And the fourth issue that was discussed by our board was the need for an accountable system. We have some great supervisory unions that work well despite their structure. But they're not designed for accountability. They were created in 1912 as teacher supervision vehicles, with superintendents being itinerant supports for teachers. But they were never designed to be management structures, which they have become. Our high-functioning SUs rely on the strong leadership of a board chair and a superintendent at a particular moment in time, but they can be very fragile because the structure relies totally on a particular personality at a particular moment. Boards often express to me that they don't feel the SU is accountable to them, that they have particular needs and concerns, but they're competing with the needs and concerns of another 7 or 8 districts. Superintendents find it very difficult to be responsive to multiple boards, and as you know, we have supervisory unions that have anywhere from 2 to 13 school boards, and many in the middle, many of 7, 8, 9. A growing concern has been the lack of accountability to voters with expanded centralization. Most of our SU budgets are now many millions of dollars, and there have been increasing concerns from voters that those budgets are not directly voted on. So as one person said at one of our recent meetings, what we need is an elected board which hires a chief executive officer who's responsible for the overall achievement of priorities within a reasonable budget. Whether that's the solution or not remains to be seen, but I raise these because in our discussions with the board, the issue was there are issues with our system and whether in fact it is adequately accountable given what we're trying to do. So with these considerations in mind, the VSBA board picked up the discussion of the specific issue that we're here to talk about this evening and felt that the status quo for its own purpose was probably not enough and that we needed to be open to a discussion. That's really where this all began. So Emily, why don't you take it from there and talk a bit about the discussions and the decisions of the VSBA board.
Great, thank you, Steve. So the VSBA board consists of school board members from throughout Vermont. I know you all know that. As a board, we spent 2 full meetings this winter discussing these issues. We don't always spend full meetings on a single topic, but we did this winter. And during those discussions, we put 3 questions before the board. And the first question was, is there a problem? The second question was, is it a magnitude that calls for fairly dramatic measures, such as doing away with supervisory unions and moving toward pre-K-12 education districts? And then, if the answer was yes to both of those, should the VSBA be involved in helping move change? So the answer to all three questions was a strong yes by our board. When faced with the three basic options for action, which you see on your screen in front of you, the board chose the third option, and they passed the following motion, which I'm going to read to you. I know you'll see it on your screen, but I'm going to read it to you anyway. The Vermont School Boards Association will participate in the development of legislation that creates pre-K-12 education systems designed to provide students with more equitable access to world-class learning opportunities, ensure greater flexibility in the management of public resources and less volatility for taxpayers, and maintain strong community involvement and support for our schools. So, what did the board discuss? After deliberating over 2 meetings, we decided that it may make sense to move to somewhat larger pre-K-12 education systems. We felt we should be involved in order to help impact the outcome. In fact, we felt boards need to be central to designing any new systems. That was really central to our conversation. We need to be a force, in fact, in making certain there is a commitment to strong communities. We really felt we needed to assure representation from each town on any new governing body if they're developed. We must be able to protect against unwanted school closures. We also felt there needs to be a formal vehicle to maintain strong local ties between schools and communities. We felt that historic choice options must be respected and even protected if that was the desire. We cannot support simply moving to big systems, but instead we decided we should focus on designing systems that provide greater flexibility in the deployment of resources so every child has equitable access to an excellent education at a cost taxpayers will continue to support. While we don't do it very often, the VSBA felt this discussion was of significant magnitude that we really needed to hear from our membership. So that's why we're here, and that's why we've held 5 in-person meetings along with this webinar to gather a wide range of perspectives from all over the state. Every meeting we went to, and boy, they were everywhere. I won't list them all here. Many of you probably were even there, but each meeting had very different tenor. But all of them consisted of very thoughtful conversations, which was great. The feedback so far has showed us how wide the perspectives are. In fact, some are feeling quite anxious to move forward toward change. What they wanted was change that offers more opportunities for students and also addresses the increasing cost of education. However, many are opposed to this effort, feeling it undermines community support for our schools, and some feel it threatens local control in the democratic process. We certainly heard that as we traveled around the state. All the meetings were very informative, they were respectful, and they were incredibly insightful. And all of us who attended all of them, and there weren't all that many, but Steve and I were at every one, we really do appreciate the contributions from everyone who's joined us so far, including everyone here tonight. I think we're going to move on now to Steve. Are you going to introduce the key elements of the
Sure.
bill? I think you are.
Yes, I am. So before I go there, I just wanted to make a mention of a couple things about the process. We're beginning to get some written questions. The way we've set this meeting up is I am now going to go through quickly the main elements of the bill. And we are then going to, I will then take a few questions from folks about, I will call them clarifying questions if you didn't understand something that specifically I've stated or that Emily has stated up to now. And then we are going to be moving to an input kind of a mode where we're asking you to offer your comments and observations about this, and we are largely going to listen. So we'll get to that in a minute. We'll explain it a little bit more, but I'm beginning to get some questions or statements, but I'm thinking that rather than trying to answer those questions right now, I'm going to hold off until I finish this section. So let's move on to this bill that is now known as H-883. It didn't have a bill number until I think Thursday or Friday, and when it was passed out by the House Education Committee. The bill is fairly lengthy. It's 30-something pages long. It's available on the legislative website. I'm assuming some of you have looked at it. We would encourage you to do so and read it in detail. But for purposes of this evening, I'm going to take the fairly high-level view, and we're glad to hear about other aspects of it. But there are 5 or 6 major elements that it's important that everyone be aware of. The first is that by July 2020, supervisory unions would cease to exist, and all current areas of the state would become part of what they say is an estimated 45 to 55 pre-K to 12 expanded districts with a single board, a single budget, and a single tax rate. I think one of the challenges in the discussion has been that until they added that clarifying language, there were people who were saying, well, we should have 10 districts, 13 districts, pick a number, any number. That's where folks were. I think their commitment has been to try to keep them looking something like the size of the average supervisory union, but understanding that some of our supervisory unions are either too big or too small, or don't make any sense given geography or whatever. So they were not inclined to sort of say every supervisory union would become one of these districts, but that's the kind of scale that they've talked about. The second major element is that districts would be given until the spring of 2017 to form themselves into expanded districts. Voluntary expanded districts could work out during that time. Board makeup, protections against closing schools, for example. Some people have said you could build into the agreement that any decision to close the school would require unanimous approval of the board. That's just an example. Voting procedures, some people have said that this would seriously impact the town meeting day discussion. Obviously it would change the discussion, but we know of no reason why different towns within a particular area couldn't have differing vehicles, except that you obviously couldn't change the budget from the floor. But in any case, that discussion can take place locally. Makeup and selection of school-based community councils, those are mentioned in the law. There's many ways to conceptualize those. There's many models from around the country that can be discussed. Choice issues. If all school districts in a particular area that's thinking about getting together, if they can all agree on whether to offer total choice or no choice, then they could proceed with that. If it's going to be a complex mix of choice issues, that is something that has to be sorted out during the course of this long process. However, the bill does include protection for current choice options, which we'll get to in a second. So anyway, these are examples of the kinds of things that would be built in during these voluntary conversations. The bill also calls for a legal and technical research team that would provide guidance around a number of complex legal and financial issues. And again, the bill includes a guarantee of the ability to maintain choice. So there were various things discussed about what those options might look like, but they all require some involved legal analysis before those specifically could be built in. And there's also this thing called the design team, which would complete the plan for the non-voluntary districts to be assigned in 2018 to 2020. So in other words, the first 3 years is a voluntary period. Following that, there is some kind of a statewide plan that is finalized and approved through the State Board of Education and then implemented. The bill does not call for the consolidation of schools. that could be something people decide to do over time, but there is nothing in the bill that speaks to consolidation of schools. It does not provide for the closure of schools other than to, I think, mention that you can build into your articles protection against closure. That's not to say that boards over time would not choose to do so, but that is the case currently. And it does not cause current choice districts to lose choice. There may be a few other things that it does not do, but those were the ones that people have raised and that I'm very aware of particular concern. The current state of the bill is that it passed out of the House Education Committee on Friday. Our understanding is that there will be at least 2 other House committees that will take a look at it. The Ways and Means Committee, because it does have tax implications, tax rate implications, tax unit implications, and it will go to Appropriations because there are costs associated with this. The bill includes an appropriation of $4 million, which is coming out of the fund that there was some additional revenue created last year at the end of the year that is supposed to go to property tax relief. They've taken there was, I think, $11 million in it. They've taken some amount of it to try to reduce the overall state tax rate, and they are proposing to move part of it into this endeavor. But that has to go to the Appropriations Committee for consideration. If passed by the full House, it then moves on to the Senate. The Senate has publicly stated some skepticism about the bill. There is clearly a lot of churning that's going on in the House. So I'd say the specific trajectory of this bill is not at all clear, either in the House or in the Senate, but it's probably too early to be making any kind of guesses because the leadership in both bodies, and to a lesser degree, though it's still there, the governor's office seems to be aligned with trying to do something. This process is very likely to go on until the end of the session. So what I'd like to do is invite people, and I'm going to turn my attention from the computer screen to questions that some folks have been putting out. What we'd like to do right now is answer clarifying questions, which would be, I didn't understand what you said about this, or what, is there some element of the bill that you've heard about that that I didn't mention, or whatever. If you have statements to make about either the bill or about this entire conversation, whether any of this is a good idea, bad idea, how your board feels about it, whatever, Emily is going to lead us in a discussion to get those perspectives from you in about 5 minutes. But before we go there, I'd like to take a look at any questions you have, and some of them are up on the screen that have been sent to me. And then if you'd like to talk to us through your computer directly, you can raise your hand that's on your screen. Carrie, if you'd keep track of the hand-raising order, we'd be glad to have you ask a quick question. Again, we'll try to keep the questions to a relative minimum so that we can make sure we're going to spend a lot of this time to hear your perspectives. And we also recognize that sometimes questions that get asked are really more statements, and I'd like to reserve those for the statement period. So I'm going to start, let's see. Look, here we go. So does VSBA have a view on whether this approach will reduce per pupil spending? I'm working these up backwards. What our thought has been that, number one, and we've said it again and again, if this is done, no one should expect large amounts of savings. However, that what could happen over time is that the rate of growth of education spending that we've seen in the last 15 years might be tempered somewhat because boards may have a greater ability to be more flexible in their staffing patterns. When you've only got a handful of teachers and you only lose 4 or 5 kids, your per pupil costs are likely to rise a lot faster than if you have a slightly larger unit that gives more flexibility. Obviously, whether that happens or not, we don't know, but that was the extent of the thought. There's a question here, how many current SUs are there and how many school districts? There are, depending on who's counting, there are 288 elected boards in the state of Vermont, and 12 of those, or 16 again, depending on how you're counting, are supervisory districts, meaning they hire their own superintendent. It's one board with one superintendent. All of the rest are part of, I believe, 45 supervisory unions. What is the average size supervisory union currently, and what would the new average size? Well, currently, supervisory unions include any number of districts from 2 to 13. In the new proposal that they've put forward, there would not be any supervisory unions. There would be districts that would include a few towns. And how many there would be really depends on how this plays itself out, community by community. So let me see. I've got, well, boy, they're coming in fast here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do, let's see, if the statewide process shows you, you're probably right there. Has the legislature examined the few cases of consolidation in the state to understand how they actually happen? The few that have actually happened have been the result of lots of hard work by local boards and ultimately local voters, and they were they're actually, something, it's probably too complicated to tell you about on the phone. I've worked closely with a couple of them, but would be glad to talk. If there's anybody that's interested in knowing about some of the specifics, feel free to contact our office, and I'll put you in touch with those board chairs or those superintendents to talk it through. Here's a question, would school boards then be responsible for arranging their closures? I assume what the question is, I mean, basically the bill lays out a process by which local boards would come together to talk about what might a slightly, I use the word slightly, a somewhat expanded district look like. How would we make it work? What could the potential benefits be, et cetera? So it contemplates a conversation. How would the community councils work? There are many models from around the country. Massachusetts, this is community councils. How would community councils work? There are many models. Massachusetts has the most, the fully developed one, and again, there's information available on those. What happens if the legislative session ends before this is over? The question of the hour. If the legislative session ends before it's over, number one, there is no bill unless they pass some version of it. And the other is that given the amount of energy that's been out there around these broad issues, I would expect it will somehow continue, and they may well do a bill that would have in it the elements of a continued conversation. But if they do nothing, the bill goes away and they in essence start over the following year. I'm going to answer a couple more of these, and then I mainly we do want to hear your perspectives on it, and not the point counterpoint or just answering questions has value to a certain point, but the reason that we convened these personal meetings as well as this webinar was to hear your perspective. So in a couple of minutes, I'm going to move it over to Emily to lead us in a conversation that would be much more, what do you want to say to us? I'm just looking to see if there's a couple of others. Would the voluntary expanded districts come into effect before 2020, or will they need to wait until the design team determines certain things? You know, I think each one would be different. And I don't know the answer to that question. First of all, I think it's pretty clear that if districts create a new way of approaching it, and it's basically consistent with this overall paradigm, they are likely to get approval. But no, okay, I see what you're asking. You're asking, would the voluntary expanded districts need to wait until the design team determines the remaining expanded districts? My understanding, if it's in a pretty clear location, that district could proceed. What the bill says is that if there's an outlying town that's next to you that doesn't really have a plan, they may delay their approval until that town figures out which direction it wants to go, something like that. But that's the best I can tell you. Okay. Okay. All right. So I'm going to answer two more, and then I'm going to turn it over to Emily. The first is, how does this bill enhance opportunities for students? Obviously, that is the question of the hour, and I think I would hope that in this discussion over the next 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, probably the next 2 or 3 weeks, that you all would have conversations about that very subject in your own area, because it's you know, there are a lot of ideas that have been thrown around. There have been ideas that have been discussed in the committee. People have put out examples. Well, you could do this, you could do that, you could have a magnet school here, you could offer enhanced different kinds of program enhancements that would be available for somewhat larger groups, so on and so forth. I was with a group the other night where they were talking about their worries about the programming for their middle school students, and the fact that their middle school students don't have a band program, don't have team sports programs, etc., because the 5th through 8th graders, there's not enough of them. There's only 2 or 3 or 4 in each grade, and they just they can't create that. And even though they would like to create it with some of their neighbors, the mechanics are too difficult. So that might be one example. I can tell you there's another, and I'm going to take the liberty of sharing because it's been in the news a lot. Underhill and Underhill ID are 2 school districts whose budgets both went down to defeat. We got a call from the Underhill ID board saying, you know, we have to go back to our voters and try to convince them to accept a budget, and our budget went down 2 to 1. And we believe that the best thing that could happen would be we figure out how to come together as school districts. And they've been wanting to do that for about 3 years or so, but because of the current mechanics of bringing together school districts, they weren't able to get that done because there was one town that didn't want to do it. And so here they are in a pretty crisis situation. So they are, you know, they're faced with doing some pretty bad things to program student opportunities because they have to get their budget down to a certain level. Those are just examples, but obviously the important thing about this discussion is local folks having this discussion, and there are some places where, you know, you may be able to create all the options that you feel you would want in the current structure, and there may well be other places where there would be great opportunity. But we simply suggest an honest conversation about it during this period, and there will be lots of different opinions about what should happen here. I'm just going to read this last statement before I turn it over, it being 12 minutes of 7. This is a statement from one of you out there. This is an opportunity for our generation of leaders to look far into the future and truly lead toward a vision that will serve our students and our communities well. We need to act boldly to ensure our systems are effectively focused on the delivery system. Whoops, it disappeared on me. We have a lot of, I don't see where it went, but okay. I am going to stop right at this point. Don't know what happened to it, but I'm going to turn this over to Emily.
I'm here.
Oh, okay. I see what happened to my. I've got this. I appreciate the degree to which you are all engaged in this process, but I'm hoping that you will continue to be that vociferous when we move into this next section. If there are specific questions that I did not answer, I will type answers out to them after this is over. And you will, by the way, be getting the full record of all the things that were written and any answers that we provide. So we will get those to you. But at this point, Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you to set the stage for the next part. Now, we have about, I'd say we have 10, 11 minutes for each section that you will be working us through, and I'll be the timekeeper.
Sounds good. Okay. Thank you, Steve. I hope everybody is continuing to be patient with all this. I don't see all the questions that pop up when people ask them, so I probably won't see any written comments. But at this point, we'd like to shift gears and ask for your input. That's what we're all here for. The VSBA represents boards throughout the state, as I said, and regardless of their specific views on this bill, and we need to hear from all of you. The purpose of this session, and in fact, the purpose of our 5 in-person sessions around the state, has been to hear the range of perspectives that exist among board members. We want to hear those perspectives, and so there are, like you've heard this a couple times, I'm going to repeat it again, there are 2 ways to share. You can raise your hand and offer verbally, and if you choose this message, which we encourage you to do, if you choose that method, please limit it to a minute or so, because we really do have a large number of people participating in the webinar, and we really want to get to as many of you as possible. Alternatively, you can type your comments in the question box. Please try to make them statements instead of asking questions, because we're not going to be able to respond to each of them if there are questions there, unfortunately, in this time frame. Instead, we're going to gather them together, like Steve said, and we're going to share them with you following up after this webinar and with the VSBA board, which is critical to this process. So we have 3 questions, and we're going to take a few minutes on each of them and move on to the next after we finish up with one. Steve says we have about 10 minutes. I'm going to read the questions just to give you time to reflect on them. A, the first question, what parts of this conversation or the bill make sense from your perspective? What parts of the conversation or the bill concern you? And finally, the third question, what goals would you have for the VSBA board moving forward? That one's a pretty big deal for us. We would like to hear from you. So again, please make your comments and your questions, your comments brief, and we'll move on to the first one. And Carrie's going to really help us an awful lot with this one. Carrie, you're probably going to help me more than anyone else. So, what parts of this conversation or the bill make sense from your perspective? Raise your hands or type in. And don't be shy.
Okay, so I will, lacking a show of hands, Carrie, you can interrupt me anytime you get somebody with their hand up.
Yes.
So I'm just going to read these as they come. If it isn't moving so fast, I can't read it. One view from my town: Riptonites are generally against this bill because they see it as reducing local control. They also fear the expanded district system will close small rural schools. The next one: this bill allows time for local decisions before state decisions. Have there been specific suggestions about how to reduce the number of teachers across the state? Okay, those kinds of questions, I would urge you to state them. I will answer questions that you word, but if you have statements about any of those kinds of things, make them as statements. But I'm not going to try to answer them on the webinar this evening. This bill respects school choice. Appreciate your encouragement to all of us to engage in an honest conversation about these issues before staking out our positions. You opened my mind when you said that. Please keep saying it to future audiences throughout the process. The next one says this bill maintains community voice. The next one says the goal to expand opportunities and equities for students. Next one, this bill builds protections for local schools. Next one says it makes sense to give districts a period to organize themselves before being forced to merge with little say in what the district will look like in the long run. What makes sense? Simplifying district-level logistics, one board instead of 8. The next one is one board for each superintendent is very important. Some lose sight of the fact that the SUs are already largely unified, single SU board, single union district board for 7 to 12. Like how the single district creates efficiency across the new SU, although there won't be SUs. This bill is the most respectful one we might expect, considering it is ultimately a legislative action. One board wants the legislature to do statewide teacher negotiations to help the process of creating de-education districts. I like how this bill allows towns to work toward reorganization, since current framework makes it difficult for changes even if wanted. Have a legal and technical research team makes sense. The bill could help us to share best education practices more broadly and create a larger community of Vermont educators.
And again, if anyone wants to verbalize, they can put their hand up and I can unmute you.
We encourage you to do that. You know, click on that little hand on the right side of your screen. You really ought to be participating in that way as well. I'm not seeing any of those questions, those comments, Steve, so you'll have to continue to read them.
I guess I've got the corner on the question,
that's fine.
the comment page, so I will keep reading them, but my voice might get monotonous after a while here. The bill could help us to share, I just read that one. Okay, there is real money attached to assist in transition. Okay. Any other answer? Well, okay, I'm sorry, Emily, this is your, I'm just the reader. You go ahead and take it.
It's fine. If there's no other comments to make on this.
Oh, there is one here. Wait.
Good.
Please that the bill will treat public education as a pre-K to 12 entity, and feel a single board superintendent relationship will be much more efficient and effective. It seems to work well for unified 6 to 12 districts. Mm-hmm. Then there's another one. It would move to a governance system that allows flexible delivery of education to students and empower our administrators to finally be able to focus on education delivery rather than have to manage dozens of board members and local town district boundaries that often are not logical for efficient education options. I like the way that it allows expanded local communities to design their own new districts rather than forcing a one-size-fits-all approach designed in Montpelier. I am concerned that boards will want to keep things too much as they are now. I'm really hoping that we are all able to open our minds and be creative in our thinking. And then the next one says, if the bill keeps costs down and stabilizes the tax rate, that makes sense. Will it do this? I was going to say the $24,000 question, but it's like the $10 million question.
Yeah,
and then, will we be able to see participants' comments in the recording? Can't see most now. So here's I'm going to ask Carrie the question, just because we're not getting a lot of people on who want to talk on this in this venue. Is there a way, without answering the questions, that we can let everybody see these?
What it will happen is when we send the email out tomorrow, you'll answer them in written format, and so the email that they'll get tomorrow will have the link to this webinar as well as the written answers to the written questions.
Right. So you'll see all of these tomorrow. I'm sorry, without answering without sending a response to everyone right this minute, I can't make it show up on your screens. I apologize for that.
No,
okay,
but what that does say is that people should continue to, ask the questions in writing, and make their comments that way. I'm surprised that school board members around the state aren't raising their hand, because they do like to be heard, as we have been noticing. So please step in, folks.
So maybe you were waiting for the next question. So why don't we go ahead to the next question, Emily?
Sure. So the next question is, what parts of the conversation or the bill make sense from your perspective? I'm sorry. I'm still reading the first one.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't change it.
What parts of the conversation or the bill concern you? We certainly have been hearing plenty of that comment at every one of our 5 meetings, so please raise your hand, speak to this one, or put it in writing. Steve will read it. As I said, I can't see the questions.
And I do have a hand raised.
Oh, we have a hand.
Brian Alexander. Just 1 second, Brian. I'm going to unmute you now. Go right ahead, Brian.
You hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Excellent. And thank you very much for hosting this webinar. I really appreciate it. One question that came from my town of Ripton is, or one concern, is that we went through a regional education district process a couple of years ago, and the overwhelming consensus of all the participants in our town, as well as the neighboring towns, was that a red was not what we wanted. I mean, by overwhelming, I'm talking 90+%. And at town meeting, there was a great deal of outrage that despite that democratic statement, we're going to be getting the equivalent of a red anyway. So as a representative of my town, I want to pass that concern on right now. And that this new bill is doing the exact opposite of what our community expressed. Thank you.
I really appreciate you sharing that, Brian. That's,
You
know, that's why we're here, is to hear those comments. So let me, we're not going to respond to each comment made. We just want you to make the comments. We're noting them if you share them verbally, and otherwise you've already written them on the screen. So I'm going to read, I'm going to go back to the screen and read a couple, and then we would urge you to raise your hand and put them on this, and put others on the screen. This one says 2020 is a long way away. Hey, it'll be here before you know it. 2020 is a long way away. We'll need to be patient. The next one is, we may lose leaders as we wait for more streamlined systems to emerge. The next one says, I'm not trying to be unduly negative, but to answer this prompt respectfully, I am okay, I'm not trying to be unduly, okay. I'm concerned about maintaining community involvement and support for our schools. Wonder how the design team will configure the 55 or so new single districts. I think my question to that individual is, are you assuming that that the design team will be doing all of those? Because the bill contemplates a lot of this happening long before that. Another one, limits on board authority to close schools could limit its ability to increase class size and school size, which is how student opportunities can be enhanced and costs kept reasonable. The part that concerns me the most about this bill is, although you've been clear that the bill itself does not dictate school closing, I don't see how small schools can possibly survive due to the fact that there will clearly be less small school representation on each bigger pre-K to 12 board. I am also concerned that we will be restructuring boards without any promise or vision about how this will help our students with either quality of education or opportunity, nor any real cost savings. The importance of keeping small schools open is so much more than just numbers, finances, ratios, etc. With minimal representation, small schools will be most assuredly suffer without a clear benefit to anyone. I got you. There was a correction on one of those items, but it's the message is clear. My district has been involved with consolidation in Vermont, and it takes a lot of work to make that happen. My concern is that a lot of consolidation effort will distract from other efforts that could be more successful in improving education while controlling costs. Thank you all for these comments up to date. Excellent thoughts. We've heard, they echo some of the concerns we've heard in the last week with our in-person meetings. After the problems with different districts trying to consolidate governance and continually being voted down, I am concerned that after all the work, they will be voted down. So you're saying that you're concerned that if individual communities go back to the well with this kind of process, and people put a lot of attention into it to try to voluntarily do it, that they could be voted down. Legitimate concern. Right now, this is another one. Right now, we are working diligently on a vision, mission statement, etc., for our town with input from our community. Will combining school boards affect any documents, initiatives we are working on now? The concern I hear there is the impact on current efforts of many different types. We've heard people talk a lot about unintended consequences and about whether it could disrupt current efforts. What I would suggest is that if you are involved in some kind of an effort already to come together with a neighbor and you're concerned about the impact of this bill, you should call us soon, because there is an element of the bill that could interfere with some current activity, and it's been brought to our attention by others, and we'd be glad to help advocate for addressing that issue. Here's another one. Our town is concerned that the composition of a unified school district board will not have adequate representation from each town to maintain current community involvement. I'd like to hear more about how communities can maintain their control over their elementary schools.
Oh, we have a hand.
Thank you all. We've got another hand, so I'm going to go to Rick Scott in a minute here. Let's go to the hand.
Sarah Peacock. Sarah, I'm going to unmute you now. Go right ahead. Sarah, are you there?
Oh, did she mean it? Okay, I'm going to go back to the list here until we see another hand. I believe this is the right direction to go. The challenges are quantifying equity in education, and it's unlikely to deliver any significant cost savings on its own. The next one says, the design team appears to all be put in these positions by legislators. I'm hoping there'll be some sort of guidelines developed to help boards during the process. I like how there is independence, but without guidance, I'm concerned about effectiveness of process, or that it might enhance unintended consequences. Thank you. Anybody else want to talk? We really do welcome your comments. And this is the one about what parts concern you.
That's right.
Okay, Sarah has raised her hand once again. Let's try it again,
okay.
Sarah.
All right.
All right, Sarah, go right ahead. We're not hearing you. I think she's muted herself now. Yes, it says attendee is self-muted, it says.
Okay. Sarah, if you want to talk, you have to unmute your
there you
microphone.
go. She unmuted it. Sarah, are you there? Sarah, are you with us?
Okay, we'll keep trying to get Sarah on here. I'm going to go back to the reading here. Our county met with our legislative contingent, and I was concerned that they really don't understand what boards actually do in the conversation about community councils. I think that's a very true statement, Benita. I think that's probably very true. There's some work for all of us. I'd like to second some other comments, namely concern about closing small schools and loss of local control. Any other comments on the second question?
Sarah, I just want to let you know I'm leaving you unmuted so that if you get that, get your microphone figured out on your end, then you can ask your question. Go right ahead, Steve.
Okay, I've got another one here. I am concerned that too many of the current Band-Aid approaches that we now have, and the status quo will be preserved. So there's too many current Band-Aid approaches. For example, why should some students have full school choice but not others in the state? Okay, Emily, we aren't, oh, here's a couple more. All right. My biggest concern would be keeping the general public engaged and informed in the process. We would welcome suggestions. We will be going to the suggestion portion of this in about 2 seconds, but anybody who has suggestions on how to go about any of this, we would welcome emails, and you'll see our email addresses at the end of this, because that's probably the biggest thing, is that people understand what's happening so they can judge for themselves the merits of the whole discussion and what it would mean for them. Okay, not seeing any other messages. Emily, do you want to go to question number 3?
Yes, I would like to, and in fact, I'd just like to say, I'll read it and then I'll just say a little quick something about it. What goals would you have for the VSBA board moving forward? This is really critical for your board. We need to hear from you. We want to hear your suggestions. So like Steve said, give us whatever you got. We'd love to hear it. We've been hearing really good feedback so far, not only tonight, but at each of our 5 meetings, and we'd love to hear from you. So let us know what you'd like to have us do moving forward.
So I have there's a number that are here. Again, we urge you to put up your hand if you want to talk to the whole group. My biggest concern would be keeping I think these are still in the concern category. My biggest concern would be keeping the general public engaged and informed. I already read that one, in the process. Second concern on need for community as well as teacher involvement. Thank you to the VSBA board for taking a leadership role on this issue. My goal is you continue to lead. Support in keeping the public engaged and informed.
Oh, Brian Alexander has a comment. Just 1 second, Brian.
Great. Thanks.
Okay,
thanks,
Brian.
Thanks, Brian, for being willing to do this.
Go right ahead, Brian.
I guess I get to be the token. I'm the token extrovert. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
We hear you.
Okay, good. Well, one goal would be for VSBA to fight for the continued existence of small rural schools. I mean, you've been hearing this concern that the move to these expanded districts would be the first step towards closing many of these small rural schools, or in the meantime losing support for them. We'd like you to fight for them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. Brian, I'm just going to ask you a quick question. Can you say any more, either now or in an email if you want to follow up on it, in terms of specifically what you'd like to see? Are you making that statement as this is the whole thing's a bad idea, or do you have are you looking for something in the bill that would state explicitly that small schools are going to be protected in the following ways?
Brian, you're unmuted.
Thanks. Well, speaking as a second-year member of the board, so a lot of this is new to me. Please forgive me if I make a misstep.
No problem.
First, to what extent you can, I'd recommend strengthening the language in this bill currently being considered for protecting small schools. Second, during this year, and if this goes forward for the next 6 years, to fight to retain the small schools grant. Every year for the past few years, that's been threatened with being cut or ended. So please fight for that. And then third, if this goes through, as we build these expanded districts, to keep an eye on for moves to close these small local rural schools and to try and protect them. So only the first one has to do with the bill per se. The second two have to do with you as a activist group within the state.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I do actually have 2 more questions now.
Great.
Jerry Shedd, I'm going to unmute you now. Go right ahead, Jerry.
Hi, and hi, Brian. Brian's my friend who's over on the other side of this small town of Ripton. And I'm just going to present another point of view that's pretty much diametrically opposed to what Brian just said. I think small schools are a problem in terms of cost and in terms of student opportunity. And I feel that unified boards, and I sent this comment before, need to have some protection of their authority to realign elementary schools in the new unified district to make sense for students and for taxpayers. And by and large, that means enlarging those schools, larger class sizes, to bend the cost curve and to provide more opportunities for students. So if we take kind of a blind attitude of, as someone put it, defending the town lines, it's not going to be of value for the taxpayer or for the student.
Thank you both for your views. You can see there are, I appreciate you guys being willing to step forward in this conversation, but you can see the kind of debate on virtually every aspect of this bill. Okay. And it's important for us all to be thoughtful, try to sort out which direction is the right one.
And I do have another hand. Winton Goodrich, I'm going to release you now, Winton. Go right ahead. You're unmuted. Winton, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Can you turn your speaker down? There you go.
Got it.
Okay.
This is actually Jason McConnell, a school board member from Sheldon, Vermont.
Wonderful.
Okay.
And so far, I have to say that I haven't read the bill in its entirety yet, but so far what I've seen is that it doesn't actually address any of the major problems that we've discussed. So I would like to see the School Board Association continue to analyze the data to identify some of the major reasons that why our per pupil cost is almost double the national average. Certainly we know it's not teacher salaries, that was clear from the data. But to take a look at those and to give some very clear and concrete steps and proposals for actually addressing the problems that we're seeing as far as more student learning opportunities, reducing the tax rate, and reducing the per pupil cost.
Great. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Carrie, any other hands, or shall I go back to the reading here?
There are no other hands right now, Steve. Go right ahead.
Right. Feel free to interrupt me. Help us to find the most effective way for us to communicate our thoughts to the legislature. Last year, the Senate got mad at us for overwhelming them with our input. I remember that quite well, but it was effective. There will always be a whole range of opinions of the membership. Leadership means really listening to and respecting the diverse views and then using the collective wisdom of the board to take a stand. If VSBA is unable to move this conversation forward, the organization will lose credibility to be heard at the state level. Manage realistic board public expectations as to immediate short-term cost savings. I would hope that the VSBA would also look at what might be possible for kids to gain if they move from a small school to a larger school. Equity in education for all may not be best served by simply preserving small schools. Good point, Brian. Can we get a chat box for subsequent webinars? It would be great to be able to read other participants' reflections. I agree. This is a little awkward that you can only get it from listening to me. So
I agree too.
Yes, we will fix that for the next time. The next one says, please stay involved in the process and advocate for opportunities for communities to work together in the best interest of students. I am on a union district board which offers more opportunities to our students than they had attending smaller schools. The next one says, perhaps the VSBA can bring together board members that have been involved in RED studies to develop a best practices guide for pursuing governance consolidation at a local level. The next one says, VSBA needs to support this bill and needs to foster education on governance. The public has trouble understanding the current structure and its downside. Also, there are single board K-12 districts in Vermont that work successfully. I don't mean that as a criticism of you speakers. You're all doing a fine job in the emerging medium. That was from Brian, who just made the suggestion on the change. Yep, Brian, you are absolutely correct.
Yes, you are.
Please keep us informed not only about the status of the bill as it moves through the processes in the legislature, but also about which elements of the bill mean, what they mean when translated to the work of our small boards. I'd like for the bill to somehow create a vehicle for the input that small communities currently have in their elementary schools. There's a long one here, and I will. I'm going to go ahead and read it as long as I'm not occupying time away from people who want to speak. I am pleased that the VSBA has taken a proactive approach to this proposed change and has set out some clear student-based priorities. It would be nice to continue to focus on how students will benefit to help us adults start to look at some new options for education governance in Vermont. Your presentation at the beginning gave some clear reasons as to why we need to look at education differently. The context has changed considerably. We have a statewide funding system. If VSBA continues to present as many of the facts as objectively as possible, that will help keep the conversation open to look to the future rather than being concerned about change. The size of the proposed expanded districts is not really that big, just different. That was one statement. The next one says, greatly appreciate legislative updates currently being emailed, would really appreciate for that to continue. Okay, any other suggestions in terms of goals for the VSBA going forward? Anybody else want to put up their hand and make a statement to us? We're happy to have statements on any of the three questions before we wrap it up. Okay, a couple other comments. Keep reminding us all that the status quo is not possible. Well, it may be possible. Thank you, Benita. What are the possible transportation impacts? Greater distances for meetings, student travel, if schools are also consolidated. Appreciate all these concerns, and whether those, for example, the transportation question, there is no discussion in the bill about school consolidation and longer transport for students, but obviously those decisions would get made by local communities, and so that's a legitimate question. Okay, I'm thinking that it's about 7:23. Emily, do you want to? I had one follow-up comment that I wanted to make, but do you want to do any kind of a follow-up on what we just heard?
No, well, sure. I say no, but then I'm going to do it anyway. As is typical of me, I just want to reiterate what we're hearing tonight is what we have heard at the last 5 meetings, a real wide variety of opinions and really thoughtful comments, questions, concerns. I've been, like I said at the beginning of this, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I am, grateful. Probably the only reason I've been doing it this long is that I'm very grateful that people are so thoughtful in their roles as school board members, and we're seeing evidence of that again tonight. And in the end, we're going to come out on the right side no matter how we come out. It'll be on the right side because of all the efforts put forward by all school board members around the state, regardless of their opinion about this bill. So I really do thank you. Are there other questions, comments? Steve, do you have any more?
Yeah, I have a couple things in the interest of wrapping up. There were a couple of comments about small schools that triggered me, but of course I've now lost the context. So I thought the two guys that spoke on the phone, described well the challenges about small schools. Oh, I do know what I said. We have had people say to us, when you look at what's happening in Vermont, we have a number, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've had a number of small schools close. They have closed not by anybody externally, they've closed by becoming too small to remain viable. So East Haven closed last year. Plymouth closed 2 or 3 years ago. If you look at the Plymouth School District budget went down to defeat. It was proposed to increase by something like 33%, and their voters rejected it. However, they closed their school 2 years ago because the number of students had fallen. But because they have total choice, many people moved into town in the last year, pushing up the number of resident students who then all needed to be tuitioned, and they weren't planning for it. I mean, that kind of thing is happening a number of places in Vermont. There are people who say that rather than watching our student population continuing to fall and watching our schools, our K-6 schools, our K-8 schools shrinking to a point where we don't feel that they're viable any longer, it is possible in some areas, and again, boards need to sort that out, that by working together they could figure out that perhaps we're working with several schools in central Vermont where they've talked about whether we should do K-12 or pre-K to 2 in several of the small schools so that the kids are close to home, and that maybe in the 3rd and 4th grade they come together in one of the schools, and then at 5th grade they come together and that they would run more of a middle school program. But those kind of things become more possible with a slightly larger group than if you're trying to manage a shrinking enrollment within the 4 walls of a small school, and when mainly you're looking at what are we going to cut next. And we have too many schools in Vermont that are in that boat, too many boards that are in that boat, and it's heart-wrenching. It really is, and I think we need to be, so the small schools issue is complicated, and there really is no right or wrong, but it's sufficiently complex that we need to remain open. I have a couple of other comments that I want to read before we wrap it up here. Given the wide divergent views expressed in this webinar, how does the VSBA board plan to accommodate all those views as the VSBA continues to be involved in the legislative process and respond to the bill in its current form or if it is amended? That is the question of the hour, Richard. We've had this happen to us on a number of occasions over the years where, we have members, we have 280 some odd members, and they are not all affected equally by these kinds of conversations. And so the question is, how do we accurately reflect the broad views? And our board last met on February 12th. We were supposed to meet on March 12th, and you might remember there was a small snowstorm that night which prevented us from meeting. So we are going to meet later this week to actually look at the bill, to look at the input from these 6 meetings, the 5 in-person meetings, and this webinar, to try to make sense out of where we are, because obviously there are compelling reasons to be having the conversation. There's an opportunity here, but there are widely divergent views, and there are a number of folks that really are very concerned about this, and we need to make sure those voices are heard. So, as well as the voices of the people who think this is the moment to really be willing to look at some change. We will have to present both sides of that perspective, and we will do so, but exactly how we work this through we'll sort out within the next few days, because we will need to now that it's moving to the point that it is. I appreciate you asking that question, and it's a fitting end to the conversation. Again, tomorrow you will receive the summary of all the comments that were made. We will be putting out some kind of broad communication to all of our members, I would think by the end of next week, not next week, this week, after our board has had a chance to engage with all the information. And if you have concerns, questions, ideas for us on how to manage what is a complex issue, we would be happy to talk to you and happy to hear your thoughts. So I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. There were 40 of you on line tonight, and we thank you for staying with us. And thanks for hanging with the format, basically listening to me reading your comments. But it's been very helpful to hear the wide range of ideas. Emily, you want to sign us off?
I would love to. So I just want to reiterate a couple of simple things. If you prefer to provide more input directly, please send an email to Carrie. You've got the email right up on your screen right now. Do that. Send any comments, questions. We, as I said in the beginning, we really do want to hear from you. We're going to be sharing all this with you, as Steve just said, all the information from this meeting. I want to thank you so much for joining us. This has been really, really helpful, as every one of these meetings have been. I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your evening. The VSBA board's going to take all this information that we gathered at these meetings, these membership outreach events, and we're going to set a direction going forward, if we can, as we seek to keep the focus on students and taxpayers, which is how I started this conversation, but while fully representing the range of board perspectives on this subject, which you all heard from tonight. And just, if I could just say briefly, I want to say thank you, and I know all of you out there listening to me join me in this thanks to Steve, Nicole, Harry, and Carrie, who have been working so hard during this really, really busy legislative session. And we are very fortunate to have such a great staff at VSBA, and I want to thank all of them on your behalf and from me. So I hope everybody has a really great evening. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, Emily.
You're welcome.
Carrie, did you want to say anything about the evaluation?
The
Right.
evaluation.
I mentioned that earlier, Carrie. There's an evaluation. You can explain that to them?
The evaluation upon exit.
Yes.
When they exit out, the evaluation should appear on your screen, and you'll have an opportunity to give us your comments.
Great. Okay, thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thanks.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.